behalf of the Rail Enthusiast Society, let me welcome all the participants. We have 32 participants today. We are looking forward to a very interesting session because we are talking, the person who is speaking has got a tremendous sense of humor. And he also writes very well, he speaks very well. I do recall reading a wonderful article written by him on another tragedy. Today we have this COVID pandemic, but if all of you will remember, there was a tragedy in Bhopal many years ago in the 80s sometime. And he wrote a wonderful piece on that. He was not in Bhopal at the time, but he was approaching or between Bhopal and Itarsi somewhere. And I recall having read that article by Mr. Anand many years back, and it has stuck in my mind. So those of you who are not familiar with RDSO, let me mention RDSO is the Research, Designs and Standards Organization of the Indian Railway. They have a huge, massive campus in Lucknow. It is manned by people who are a sort of permanent cadre of RDSO, who spend all their lives in Lucknow. And there are railwaymen like Mr. Anand who go there for 10 years or 5 to 7 years in an endeavor to do research and modernize Indian railway system. But apart from that, they do a lot of other activities such as inspections. I'm sure Mr. Anand will tell you more about it. So before we start, I'll request JL to kindly introduce the speaker before we start. JL.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Vinu Mathur. All of you are aware that the Indian Railways is now about 168 years old. It'll be very interesting to note that out of this 168 years, more than 1/3 of these years, our speaker for the day, Mr. Venkateshwaran Anand, retired GM Southern Railway, has had association with the railways. So if you add the time before he joined the railways and traveled to school by train, if you add those years, probably half the existence of the Indian Railways, Mr. Anand has had association with it. Most railwaymen after retirement tend to forget the railways and break off their ties with it, but not Mr. Anand. He has written books, he has given speeches. The very fact that he's giving this talk today shows very clearly that he is still very much connected with the railways. Apart from that, as Mr. Mathur mentioned, he's an excellent speaker. He has an excellent ability to recall events, whether they are anecdotal or whether they are technical. Therefore, I will not stay between you and Mr. Anand. So I would hand over to Mr. Anand, please.
Thank you, Jay. Can you all see me?
Yes, I can see you.
I have applied best aftershave lotion and all that to be presentable. So, very good morning to all of you. Some of you have logged in from abroad at very odd times. Thank you, one and all. Now,
excuse me, may I request all participants to mute their audios?
Jay, can you start showing the slides?
I'll do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I served the Indian Railway for 41 years, and I went from Chennai to Lucknow to Bhusawal to Katni, and Katni via Bombay to RDSO to DLW, and I had comparatively only 9 transfers. Must be a record because number of transfers on Indian Railways officers is about 25. Now, I joined...
Rewriting, duplicating, cancelling organization. RDS 0. Rejected, dejected, suppressed officers. Refuge for disgruntled and superseded officers. PM's helicopter ride. Held in derision by PMs. Relationship between client and consultant. That is the story.
You know, the RDSO was formed in 1957. Before that, it existed at different places. There was the Central Standards Office, which was in Shimla, in a beautiful called the Ellerslie building. It was like a Scots castle. And the RDSO is the consultant, in-house consultant to the Indian Railways. The relationship is not like between a consultant and a client, because here the client is supporting the consultant, including the purse strings and the pay and allowances and whatever RDSO wants, they have to depend on the railway board. So there is always a disconnect between the person who is on the field. As we say proudly, Indian Railways is the lifeline of the nation, and it runs 24/7. So the people who actually make it happen, a little derision for what is felt are the backroom boffins sitting in their air-conditioned comfort or in their ivory tower. Can you hear me, sir?
Sir,
We
may
can
I
hear you,
interrupt?
but Mr. Govind, please audio.
Yes.
Audio.
So, Mr. Jail Singh, is it not possible for you to identify?
Sir, this is Srinivas here. Vikas sent a text message saying that the organizers can mute everybody else.
I'd request, I have muted everyone. I'd request if Mr. Anand can unmute himself and start speaking.
Anand, the unmute button is on the top nearer the right-hand edge of the screen. Anand, you need to unmute yourself if we have to hear you. We can't hear you. This is Gopal from Madras.
Sir, I think the host can unmute also.
I'm trying to unmute him, but वो हो नहीं रहा.
Hey. Am I unmuted now?
Yes,
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Good, we can hear you now.
Okay. So the people in the field, the what do you call, the movers and shakers, in all organizations.
Oh, you are muted again. Anand, you are muted again. Unmute yourself again.
Am I audible now?
Yeah, you're okay now.
All right. So they have come up with acronyms like RDSO is nothing but a rewriting, duplicating, and stenciling organization. Some people say it is RDS 0. Some people said they are a rejected, dejected, and suppressed officers organization, a refuge for disgruntled and superseded officers. So it is held in derision by the field workers. And the defining moment in RDSO's existence was our late Prime Minister, Mr. Atal Bihari Vajpayee's helicopter ride. Now, Lucknow was the PM's constituency, and he wanted to visit his constituency. He boarded a helicopter, and suddenly there was a dust storm, and the helicopter lost contact with control tower, and people were anxiously waiting at Amausi airport when suddenly out of the dust, the helicopter landed, and people were so happy. They invaded the tarmac, they garlanded the pilot, the helicopter pilot, and asked him, "You have literally saved the PM's life. How did you do it? How did you land in spite of this weather?" He said, "Indeed, I lost contact, but I found I was hovering dangerously close to some tall buildings, and people had come out to watch. And so I thought I would take their help. I took out a piece of paper and wrote on it, 'Where am I? Main kahan hoon?' And promptly the reply came, 'You're in a helicopter.' So I landed at the airport. I said, how did you do it? He says, I knew that the only the organization in Lucknow which will give you a correct, accurate, very precise answer, which is totally useless to you. So I knew I was very near RDSO, and RDSO always gives to the point answers which may be totally useless to your requirements. Now, prior to independence, the Indian Railways only consultant was Messrs. Rendell, Palmer, and Tritton. And Rendell had this hoary firm set up in 1838, specialized in bridge building. They designed the Lansdowne Bridge at Rohri now in Pakistan. They designed the Harding Bridge over the river Padma, and they designed the steel bridge, a trestle bridge, and it was manufactured in USA and brought to a place called Gotek in Burma. And in India, their work is perpetually known by the iconic Howrah Bridge. Now, the RDSO did exist in the Central Standards Office in Delhi. It used to divide its time between Delhi and Shimla. And they had a small testing unit at Lucknow. And they had a metallurgical and chemical wing in Chittaranjan, locomotive work. So the three were merged, and the RDSO was formally declared in 1957. That is a full 10 years after our independence. An excellent book has been penned by Mr. S.R. Agarwal. It is available online. You can download it and read it. It's a very comprehensive book of what RDSO does or what they have been doing. Can I see the next slide, please? Okay, now, next. You see, over the years, the various components of Indian Railways had imported locomotives, carriages and wagons and other equipment, trains, all to diverse designs. And at the time of independence, the number of steam locomotives of different types was overwhelming. And there was no standardization, though CSO, the Central Standards Office, issued drawings mainly for wagons, because wagons move seamlessly from one railway to another. And to control this, there was another 120-year-old organization called the Indian Railways Conference Association. As far as research was concerned, the only dynamic equipment available with RDSO was the old dynamometer car, which had been purchased by the GIP, the Great Indian Peninsular Railway, which we all felt was grossly ignorant of punctuality. Anyway, so this dynamometer car was fitted out with Swiss mechanical equipment manufactured by Messrs. Amsler. So it had a device for measuring the speeds. It had a linear mechanical integrator for converting the speed into distance. It could measure drawbar pull. It could measure horsepower. So all the newly built post-war locomotives, like the WP, were tested through this dynamometer car. However, there was no test for the riding quality. Can I see the next slide, please? Now, riding quality was never tested rigorously because we had no standards. And the story goes that whenever a new coach or new locomotive was introduced, the chief mechanical engineer and chief civil engineer would attach their inspection cars to the test train, and they would, over a cup of tea, they would say, I think this is a 1 sugar cube ride. They used to apparently build a tower of sugar cubes, and when the last sugar cube would fall off, it meant that the vehicle had reached its ultimate test speed, and that was declared as the sanctioned speed. Now, after RDSO was formed, they decided that we should have more accurate, more rigorous way of measuring the speed potential by measuring the accelerations and the forces between the wheel and the rail. But this involved importing some accelerometers, popularly known as Cambridge accelerometer, which was accurate only at about between 0 to 8 degrees Celsius. So all RDSO trials had to be conducted wherever there was an ice factory. The ice factory was in a place called Shamgarh on the Western Railway. And so a number of trials were performed using these Cambridge accelerometers. And for measuring spring deflections and other movements, there was a device called a visicorder. This used to measure the vibrations through a tiny camera, and or rather, it was not even a camera, it was just a tiny mirror suspended on a galvanometer. And that would record the movements on photographic film. So at the end of the day, when you actually develop the film, sometimes there would be nothing recorded. It was a very dicey affair. So the RDSO officers, there was the signal and telecommunication wing. They had a small workshop, and the legendary R.N.G. Dastidar, who designed the accelerometers and pen recorders. The pen recorders, and you could actually see what was recording. And these recorders were imported from USA through a company called the Baldwin Lima Hamilton, BLH. So the recorders came to be known as BLH recorders. And the oscillograph car was therefore given the code BHLRZ. RZ meant test vehicle, BLH for Baldwin Lima Hamilton. There was also the story that a team had gone to Shivakashi in Southern Railway, and another team had gone to a village called Romana Albel Singh in Firozpur division. And they had spent almost their entire life there because they were recording some parameters, I think some geotechnical investigations. So they would come back to Lucknow only to collect their pay, and then they would go back. And it is said that they spent half their life there, they got married there, they got children there, and finally they came to RDSO back to collect their pension or whatever it is. The RDSO had a number of wings, and I've lost count. And there's another story that two railway passengers, while returning to Lucknow, started chatting with each other. And then they came to know that they both work in RDSO. So the various directorates were working on watertight compartments. All right. We even had a psychotechnical cell to evaluate the drivers, the locomotive drivers or locomotive engineers as they are called in USA. Their psychological profile would be recorded, and only when they pass the psycho test, they are allowed to drive the trains. Can we see the next slide, sir? Now, the RDSO had very many achievements to their credit, whatever they may be called, RDS 0 or whatever it is. One of them was a monumental report called the Civil and Mechanical Engineering Report. That's all, C&M1. And that decided the fate of the Indian Railways for their speed increase. The then Chairman Railway Board, Mr. B.C. Ganguly, an outstanding civil engineer, declared that in 6 years, we'll increase the speed of all trains, all passenger carrying trains, in increments of 10 kilometers per hour till we reach 160 kilometers. This somewhere in the late 50s or early 60s, this decision was conveyed. And in due course, in 3 years, we had increased the speed from 100 to 130. And that is when the Rajdhani Express was introduced at a maximum speed of 130 kilometers per hour. And it has taken another almost 5 decades before the next increase in speed was achieved somewhere in the late 80s. with the introduction of the Shatabdi series of trains. Now, it is said that the LHB coach, or the Link-Hoffman-Busch coach, which came on technological transfer, was longer and could carry more passengers, etc. But RDSO had already designed 2 longer coaches, which were duly manufactured in Integral Coach Factory. And the severe limitation on design was that the signaling equipment had a device called the lock bar. Now the lock bar was 42 feet, and thus the carrying wheels, between 2 wheels, the distance could not increase beyond 42 from safety considerations. The RDSO designed the IR-20 as a concept, a locomotive, but mainly the carriages, which somewhere in the mid-90s, they were put on the Amritsar Shatabdi Express. And by then, they had been tested up to 176 kilometers per hour and declared fit for 160 kilometers. But somehow that design was not pursued. It was overwhelmed by the imported. Another great achievement was the merger of European and Japanese and American designs. Till then, the group or the European group locomotives were to French standards, and they had a consortium of French, German, Swedish, Italy, and there was huge diversification. There was the WM1, which was a European design. There was the WAM2 and WM3, which were Japanese designs. On the freight side, we had the WAG series 1, 2, 3, 4. All of them landed up with some problems or the other. It was mainly, perhaps with utmost respect, I could say, they were not designed for Indian Railways track. So the RDSO stepped in and they put the diesel locomotive bogies, 3-axle bogies, under the above the waist, so to speak. There was the regular, a combination of European and Japanese design. And this WM4 became the workhorse of the Indian Railways and was being used both for freight as well as passenger traffic. Another area where helped was in electric multiple units imported from diverse countries. It started with Metropolitan Camel of Britain. Then we had Japanese designed Nippon Sharyo. We had equipment supplied by English Electric, Breda, Ansaldo. They were the Breda Italian design. And it was a nightmare maintaining all these diverse types of electric multiple units. And the crown, in my opinion, was the container project. India was the first country in the Asia to start containerization. We'll come back to later. Then with the increase in industrial activity, the setting up of fertilizer plants, the setting up of Bharat Heavy Electricals, manufacture of huge transport, all these needed special purpose wagons. And the designs were so RDSO was expected to develop these designs in in quick order. They said the RDSO can even design a wagon. Indian Railways always looked for wagons which would carry traffic in both directions, loaded and there was unloaded or empty wagon movement was sought to be reduced to a minimum. So they said RDSO can even design a wagon which will carry cryogenic equipment, or it can carry liquid oxygen in one direction and live buffaloes in the other direction. Another great achievement was the milk tank wagons, which started with a gift from New Zealand. They gifted 5 tank barrels, which were mounted on ordinary underframes, the standard IRS underframes, and they went into service from Chalisgaon to Mumbai. And then in came Dr. Varghese Kurian. He said this Operation Flood, which made India the largest producer of milk in the world, was made possible only by the bulk movement of milk in railway tank wagons. Now, RDSO was known for its diligence, and there was the legendary J.P. Gupta, who was my boss. He was so diligent. Before putting anything in writing, it was a joke that if Mr. Gupta wanted to find out what Anand eats for breakfast, he'll of course start inquiring. He'll ask Anand himself, Anand, what did you have for breakfast? And Anand replies, I've had fried eggs. But Mr. Gupta would go to meet Mrs. Anand and ask her, what does your husband eat for breakfast? She'll say, oh, he's very fond of fried eggs. After which the inquirer would ask Mr. Anand's cook, what does he eat for breakfast? And the cook will say, he eats fried eggs. And still Mr. Gupta would not write that Anand eats breakfast of fried eggs. He would personally go quietly and check that trash can in Anand's backyard to see that indeed the eggshells were there. So that's the kind of diligence which was exercised, and it has stood the Indian Railways very well. Next slide, please. I'm very proud of showing this picture, which was drawn by one of my draftsmen in Lucknow. It shows that containerization combines the flexibility of road. So you have a picture of this road vehicle, and behind that you can see a locomotive showing the reliability of railways, economy of shipping. There's nothing to beat ocean traffic for sheer economy. And of course, the speed of air as depicted in these jet engines at the back. So the container revolutionized traffic all over the world. In Indian Railways, we started using our own specially designed containers, which could go on meter gauge wagons, it could go on broad gauge wagons, it could travel on rail. And RDSO set up its own marketing organization and introduced these containers. But at some stage, the project wandered off. And for almost 2 decades, we made no progress till the CONCOR, the Container Corporation of India, was formed. This also led to a famous statement by RDSO, because there was some bickering going on between directorates, the Traffic Directorate and the Mechanical Directorate, till RDSO said they wrote a detailed letter to the Railway Board that in future RDSO will do exactly what the Railway Board tells them. Nothing more, nothing less. Next slide, please. Now I'll come to the little lighter side. One of the fun facts is that India's first escalator, I'm not saying the railway's first escalator, the first escalator erected in India was in Old Delhi platform number 18 or faraway platform. This escalator was manufactured in Amritsar workshop, and they came and erected it in Old Delhi station. Old timers may have remembered this. Way back in 1956, I've seen this escalator. It could only go up. So the other side had regular stairs. Now, the Indian Railways was obsessed with alarm chain pulling because of the loss in punctuality. So various trials were conducted how to prevent or how to reduce the incidence of alarm chain pulling. But there's nothing. It was, they said, there is no provision in that the alarm chain is pulled in a mainline train. One proposal was that the driver should get, the loco pilot as he's called, he should get an audio-visual warning. And also he will find that the brake vacuum level is dropping. So they wanted to fit this additional equipment on all coaches and all locomotives, which are predominantly steam locomotives. But the chairman Railway Board, Mr. Warrior, intervened. He said, alarm chain pulling is a law and order problem. We cannot solve it by technical means. And please do not burden the poor engine driver. As it is, he is having a harrowing time managing the water level, the steam pressure, the lubricant level, and whether enough coal is available. Don't burden him with one more decision making. At present, the alarm chain, if it's pulled, the train stops. That's it. And we should not do anything more. But there were some cranks. There was one persistent fellow who said, I have designed and I have manufactured the alarm chain puller preventer. That is, his device would catch the alarm chain pull or whoever was pulling the chain, his hand would be caught in a trap. And this was his proposal. He was prepared to demonstrate his alarm chain puller preventer. But Mr. Gupta, he permitted himself a small smile. He said, Anand, suppose it's a lady who is trying to ward off somebody who's trying to assault her. You already disabled her. Her one hand is caught in the alarm chain puller preventer. So we rejected that design. But our own metallurgical and chemical wing spent long years trying to develop a non-drying paint, where the rest of the world was going for paint which could dry faster and faster. We had a project for non-drying paint. And the idea was very simple. If anybody pulls the alarm chain without reason or with reason, he pulls the alarm chain, his hand will be smeared with this non-drying paint and he would be literally caught red-handed. Fortunately, this project did not see any completion. My personal contribution was in when we redesigned the AC 25 kV run multiple units. At that time, there were 3 types of coaches. One was trailer coach, but with a driver's cab. It was known as the driving trailer. Behind that was the motor coach, that is, which supplied the traction. And behind that was a non-driving trailer. So we thought we would reduce the number of designs to 2. We'll just have a driving motor coach and we'll have ordinary trailers behind it. And this was duly designed and manufactured by Integral Coach Factory. And it was sent to Calcutta. And immediately thereafter, there was a spate of complaints that this coach had a handbrake which was mounted on the outside, behind right next to the buffers, or where the buffer should have been. This handbrake was there. We had to put the handbrake, the operating handle outside, because inside the driving motor coach, there was already a heap of equipment, and taking the rigging to the motored coaches was not possible. So we put this handbrake outside. Immediately there were complaints, and then the chief electrical engineer of Eastern Railway, he said, I am not going to use this rakes till your officers come and see the problem for themselves. They are just sitting in their ivory towers, not knowing what the problem is. So I went to Shialda, that is the terminus where the multiple units would be. That was the last station. And I asked the motorman, what's the problem? He came out with some technical problems. He said, suppose the coach rolls off when I'm trying to apply the handbrake. You know, we have a very steep gradient at a place called Mazarhat, where it is so steep that even a moment's delay, the whole train may roll down. That was not very tenable because these coaches were after all fitted with electro-pneumatic brakes, and the brake should normally hold. Anyway, I tried to explain to him, this is only a parking brake. At the end of your journey, when you take the coach into the car shed for repair, you apply these brakes. It's a parking brake. He was not satisfied. He said, I want you to see one train come in, and then I'll tell you. So when the next train rolled in, he pointed out that the thousands of passengers streaming out from the train were attending to the first call of nature they would sort of lean between 2 coaches, and their offerings used to fall on the handbrake handle. And when this handle or this wheel was fully drenched, the motorman asked me, sir, now you apply the handbrake yourself. So it was back to the drawing board, and we designed a pneumatically operated parking brake whose normal setting was that the brakes would apply. And the brakes could be released only by a small compressor. Another place where we just had to apply common sense was the flyover at Andheri. Those who are familiar with the suburban area of Bombay, the Central Railway's Harbour branch went over a flyover at Mahim and then settled down on the extreme left. But the problem was that these trains terminated at Andheri, and transferring back to the lines was quite a problem. So it was decided to build one more flyover from the Western Railway lines over the Central Railways line at between Bandra and Andheri. Now, that was quite a steep gradient and with sharp reverse curves. There was no guarantee that two 12-foot wide coaches could cross each other without colliding. We had no means of finding out the dynamic profile, or what they call the kinematic profile of the coaches. So we relied on sheer intuition, and the RDSO said it is cleared. The drawings are cleared, the general arrangement drawing. They said, why? They said, between Masjid and Sandhurst Road of Central Railway, the harbour branch flies over the main line at Sandhurst Road. And that, I believe, is the steepest broad gauge gradient on the Indian Railways, 1 in 34. I'm not sure. Anyway, so by experience and due diligence, we were able to design this flyover at Andheri, or clear the design. Anyway, it has withstood the test of time for almost 40 years. So I suppose it was a good design. Now, we used to get letters from passengers. Then I realized that the Indian Railways is really the lifeline. And there were very well-meaning people who would send their suggestions for improvement, including the toilet redesigned. There was a gentleman from Dholpur who insisted that he had made a design by which the discharge from the lavatory would be done in a controlled manner. And it would be done only when the train picks up 15 kilometers per hour. We had to tell that gentleman, look, you're only transferring the problem from one place to another. Instead of it being discharged all along the track, now it's going to be discharged right at the end of the platform. You're only compounding the problems. But of course, later on, Indian Railways decided they did have these toilets, what they call controlled discharge toilets. But it did not work in places like Vijayawada and Kharagpur, where two trains could be started from the same platform. There was some of the letters were very, very, you could literally feel the enthusiasm. Like one Mr., let us call him Mr. Muniandi from Puliyantop, Madras. He wrote a long letter in English and Tamil. And one of his suggestions was that the railway coaches should be designed to look like sharks, suramin in Tamil, with the head in front, and at the tail there would be a fin. And this, he hoped, thus the train could cut through the air fastly. So we used to get a lot of suggestions, and that is where the lighter vein comes in. And I think I'm nearing the end of my talk. Of course, RDSO, there were other legends. One legend was that any railway minister who visits RDSO loses his job. In fact, when Mr. Pai came as railway minister, he had 2 terms, and both terms he went out of the railways just after visiting RDSO. So it became a jinx. And such a bad jinx, they said Lalit Narayan Mishra not only lost his job, he lost his life. And Madhu Dandavate, when he came to RDSO, he said, you officers think that I lose my job, huh? And you people are trying to boycott me. We said it's nothing of the sort. But RDSO, Mr. Dandavate also lost his job. In fact, they lost the election in 1980. So this was one of the jinx of RDSO. I think I have far exceeded my time allotted to me. I hope you enjoyed the lecture as much as I enjoyed delivering it. And now I please throw open the house for questions. I can assure you I have not planted any questions. Last time I tried that way back about 40 years ago, I planted some questions. And unfortunately, the people who are supposed to ask the question in sequence, they asked in the wrong sequence. I gave the answers in sequence, but nothing mattered. At the end of the day, I received a very loud applause for a very good paper. A good day to you. Please enjoy yourself. Now, if there are questions. Thank you, Vikas, for your compliment.
I will look forward to some more jokes, Anand. In fact, in these gloomy days, I thought Anand would make us all laugh. But yeah, you took us through the history of RDSO. Your style was lost because you never cracked any jokes. Gopal.
I thought I started with the joke about the helicopter ride. Okay. One more question is coming up.
Mr. Manmohan Mehta has raised his hand. Mr. Manmohan Mehta, would you like to say something?
I think it was me.
Okay. Welcome.
In any case, he spoke about the EMU of Bombay, starting with Metro Camel. Actually, Central Railway had an older EMU design which was known as the 1928 stock. So it was the number of EMU stock in Central Railway was quite amazing. It started with 1928 stock, then 51 Metro Camel. Then, of course, sorry.
Oh, all right. So I was under the impression that the 28 stock was Metro Camel.
No. 1928 stock may have been manufactured by Metro Camel, older Metro Camel, but okay. The Metro Camel which you are referring is a modern version which came in 1951-52.
Okay.
They are known as Metro Camel stock.
Thank you, sir.
The 1928 stock was the original when we had the first electrification of the Bombay suburban service. We had what were known as the 1928 stock. And they had, those first class had really, you could switch over facing each other so that people could play bridge. So the 28 stock was quite unique, but it had all sorts of funny things. It had a special screw coupler with the motor coach, had a special screw coupler which had internal threads. Mm-hmm. Of course, from 51 stock, we started the modern 12-foot gauge stock. The 28 suburban stock was conventional, that is 10 foot 6 inches or something, narrow width. The 12-foot started with the 1951 Metro Canal.
Thank you, sir.
There are two questions. One from Sushil Luthra. He would like you to relate some incidents from NKJ.
NKJ, I'll put it very briefly. I had written an article called Funny Money. You know, this was in short, we had an employee, let us call him Narmada Prasad. And he started his own scheme. He would collect money from the foremen and lend it out to the other workmen. And his he would collect money at 48% interest and loan it at 60% interest, 1.5 per month. So he was making 12% interest on capital, which was not his really. But this time everything was going on very smoothly till a virulent trade union leader. He borrowed 3,000 rupees from Narmada Prasad and refused to pay up. And thus the scheme came to a sad end. For good measure, he bashed up Narmada Prasad or whatever he was. And meanwhile, Narmada Prasad was paying an honorarium to the local money lenders that this is my turf, I'll give you a monthly retainer. So he couldn't give that retainer, and ultimately he got beaten up by those people also. So that was called funny money. Luthra once went to inspect some railwaymen's quarters. He found that almost all of them had been sublet to outsiders. Mr. Kaushik Dharwadkar, sir, the original DC electrification, this was done at 1500 volts DC in Bombay and Chennai. And when they came to Calcutta electrification, I think they did it at 3000 volts. Subsequently, the stock of 3000 volts stock was transferred to Bombay region, and they were modified to run under 1500. Today, there is not 1 inch of 1500 volts DC left. The Bombay suburban area has also been converted to 25 kV AC, which is really one of the greatest achievement of the Indian Railways. Whole bridges were lifted and replaced overnight, and this was a quite revolution. In fact, 25 kV itself was a breakthrough for Indian Railways. It was a leap of faith. There was still adherents of 1500 volts design. So the leap of faith for Indian Railways to go in for 25 kV, which had just been tried out in France and France and Japan.
Kaushik Dharwadkar wanted to know if there was some facilities at RDSO for testing 1500 volt and 3000 volt stock.
No. There was no. Those tests had to be done in the field. In fact, believe it or not, RDSO doesn't even have a dedicated test track. Must be the only consultant of that size. And the project was sanctioned. I don't think it is ready yet. I think latest proposal is to have it beyond Rewari. Oh, how about some anecdote from your stint in Southeastern Railway Garden Reach? I think that will need another
separate talk
session. Yes, but however, suffice it to say that I learned that language, communication is very important. I told my staff car driver, हमें घर छोड़ के तुम अपना घर चले जाओ. So he left me home. Then I got a phone call from the office your driver is waiting here. I said, I told him to go home. He said, what did you tell him, sir? I said, tum apna ghar chale jao. Now, ghar in colloquial Bengali means the office. I should have said, tum apne badi chale jao. Another time, I kept addressing my office superintendent as Mr. Murmu. Turned out his name was actually Maji. And when I asked him, look, how come you kept on responding to the name Murmu? He said, sir, we are all very afraid of you. हम आपसे बहुत डरते हैं. So if I am Murmu in your room, I am Murmu, though my name is Maji. But Southeastern Railway was derived from the BNR, bribes never refused, brains near you know what. Just as GIP was grossly ignorant of punctuality, and the BB&CA was bad, beastly, and cannot improve, the Northwestern was the not working railway, and the Southern Maratha was mails in slow motion railway, and good old South Indian Railway was the Sambar Idli Railway, or Sri Rangam Iyengar's Railway.
What is that antibody? There is one antibody whose level should be 10, and it was 80. So 80.
Oh, that is, I think that's Mr. Shankar on the phone.
There is infection. It's all that we can. But there is a
There is Shankar on the phone, so he's coming on.
I think that Apollo.
Anyway, are there any more questions?
Yeah. Do you remember any signaling anecdote of RDSO?
Signaling, you know, some of my best friends in RDSO were from the signals branch, including Mr. K.S. Raghavan, who is now undergoing treatment for COVID in Coimbatore. And we had S.K. Chopra, we had R.L. Arora, and signal, when you say signal department, we had used, we had to use most instruments. We had a group of people called signalers, and they were actually using Morse code and sending messages. And then these messages were duly abbreviated, and the Signal Directorate brought out a new manual. It's worth reading because the agent GIP Railway was known as Agrippa, and the agent Bombay and Baroda Central Railway was known as Bomb Baroda. And the messages were all 6 letters long, and most of them used to end with the word ensile, E-N-S-I-L-E. Matter requires your immediate attention. Then there was Cascam, Shishi. I think Cascam meant, I'm not sure, it meant please order 2 slices of buttered toast and a pot of tea. So the signals contribution, quite contribution to Indian Railways. Another great achievement of the signals branch without RDSO, of course, was the setting up of dedicated fiber optic cable, thousands and thousands kilometers of it, for which we owe Mr. A.K. Chopra a debt of gratitude. Always railways tried to be self-sufficient in every department, which was neither here nor there.
Mr. Prakash Tendulkar has raised his hand. Mr. Tendulkar.
Yeah, I wanted to mention about the EMUs that came on Western Railway and Central Railway between 1958 and 1960. There were 4 suppliers: Metro Camel, Hitachi, Breda, and Ansaldo. Of these, Metro Camels finally settled only on Western Railway, whereas the remaining three went to Central Railway. Now, another thing that Anand mentioned about raising the bridges to accommodate 25 kV AC, on Western Railway, the bridges were raised much before then. Because of the waterlogging, there was a problem at Grant Road. And so the bridge at Grant Road was raised maybe 15, 20 years earlier. That was something like about 1.5 feet or something. And with 25 kV AC, even that one was not adequate. So they use a lot of PTFE to insulate the bridge and the overhead wires. That's all I wanted to mention about.
Prakash sir, this, Mr. Shankar mentioned that the 1928 stock was not Metro Camel. So
no.
What was it?
Actually, how to name that stock is a big question. 1928 stock was actually a combination of multiple vendors. They call it BTH, that is British Thomson Houston, because the master controller had the logo of BTH on it. So everybody could see it. But it was English Electric, BTH, and so many combinations. So I do not know exactly how to label that 1928 stock on Western Railway. And on Central Railway, 1925 stock had two different models. One for Harbour Branch, one for the main line. The Harbour Branch was 10 feet wide like the traditional coaches. And mainline coaches were 12 feet wide.
Thank you for the...
In fact, till 1940, Central Railway ran a race special between Bombay and Pune using the Harbour Branch EMUs, 12-coach rake.
I'm
done.
Thank you. Thank you for staying awake.
Oh, I always remain awake.
Okay.
Mr. Anand, I have a question. In your second slide, you have shown architecture was a directorate, which was abolished at some stage.
Yes.
What happened?
So the RDSO had its own architectural directorate, and they were what they call the CPWD type. They designed some highly horrible looking buildings. There was a building called the Rajdhani Hall. And then they designed the rest houses or transit accommodation for RDSO's officers, which were more like pigeonholes. In one small area, they wanted to provide a drawing room, dining room, kitchen, everything. And nobody moved into that. Only I think they were abolished or what, I don't know. So but the architecture director made a beautiful, very aesthetically pleasing design for Kanyakumari railway station. And the foundation stone had been laid by Indira Gandhi herself. So when Madhu Dandavate visited RDSO, he was shown this model, the model of it was a beautiful circular type of building. And it looked very beautiful. But then, everybody has their own opinion when it comes to architecture or coach interiors. So totally showed this model and to Madhu Dandavate. He promptly rejected it. It's what a useless thing. No, this has to change. I'll get Charles Korea to design the Kanyakumari station. So the architecture directorate said, "Sir, but this has already been approved by the Prime Minister." He said, which Prime Minister? And he said, Indira Gandhi. He said, then all the more reason to reject this. And you also better. So due to one, you could call it faux pas or a diplomatic this thing, the architecture directorate itself was abolished thanks to Venkateshwaran.
So may I add something to this story?
Let me tell you what another story related to the abolishing of the architectural directorate. Mr. Sindhia used to be the Minister for Railways at once upon a time. And I was posted at the Railway Staff College, as perhaps was Manikutty at the time. And when the minister Sindhia came to Baroda, you have this magnificent Renaissance style palace building. Yes. And they had at that time built a new office complex near the new hostel, which was, as you described, not a particularly impressive building, and in no way sort of matched the palace architecture. And it was at that time I thought Sindhia gave the orders for the closure of the directorate while at Baroda.
I think Mr. Mathur, I think you are right. Andheri rejected this thing, and he called Charles Correa to design the Kanyakumari station. Charles Correa handed over the commission to a young architect called N. Mahesh. But the bell started tolling for architecture directorate from Madhu Dandavate's time. It maybe died very slowly, but it finally died.
So allow me to add something here.
Please.
I was in RDSO when Mr. Sindhia visited in, I think, 1985 or 86.
Yeah.
And what Mr. Mathur said, maybe already he had been informed about the RDSO's, the architecture wing's choice of designs for RDSO. And probably Mr. Dandavate's earlier actions were also informed to him. So during his round of RDSO, when he entered the NXC 2 building, which housed the architecture directorate and was designed by them. So he asked a question that who has designed this building? And it was proudly said that's an architecture wing. And the director was brought in front. So he was probably already primed about this. And there announced that while standing in the corridor or the entrance of the NXT 2 building, that from tomorrow, I don't want an architecture director to continue. And just walked off in a huff. I think this is the final nail which he put into the coffin of architecture.
One question, Patel.
Yes.
Sir, आप इतना RDSO में काम किया, आप जानते थे कि RDSO's approval is required for so many things. Sir, how did you let me get away with converting Bob wagon to air brake without any trials after that? I have a guilt. Sometimes get sleep nightmares.
So, you converted it to air brakes.
Yes, sir. We remember that.
Yes. And that the first time, you won't believe others. I mean, we actually ran a competition between I think it was the plate shop and the wagon shop.
Yes, sir.
To this work. And it was tendered out like a regular tender, wanted someone to.
Yes, sir.
Propose that.
Sir, वो अलग चीज है, but बिना किसी ट्रायल के मेरे को कभी-कभी अभी घबराहट होती है कि something had happened in those steep grades which were there, but somehow it went off very well. Thanks.
No, I you know what happened? My late friend, Mr. Prabir Chatterjee.
Yes, sir. He cursed me, sir, when I said I want to convert. मैं कर दूंगा, तो he told me, don't waste my time.
He said, do something because these old stock are already overloaded. So he took me on an engine. I mean, a fully loaded train with iron ore was coming down. And just that place, Jinkpani or something. It was in the remote corner of BNR. Jingpani, we were approaching the station. We were doing a good 40 kilometers per hour, but the vacuum level was quite low. I grandly said, "Bhai, dynamic brake laga ke chalao." Now, unfortunately, that electric locomotive did not have dynamic brakes. So, as I feared, I mean, literally it was hurtling down. We crossed the distance signal, and those days they used to have, the color light signaling, and then we barely stopped short of the starter, by which now I had broken out into a sweat and appealed to all the gods to please save me from this. So Prabir had a good laugh. He said, "Dada, you must do something about it." I said, "What shall I do?" He said, "Why don't you fit it with air brakes?" I said, "The railway board will never agree. This stock is more than 40 years old, though there is nothing wrong with them." There is an article by Balakesari on this BOB and BOBYN, but that I considered a greatest achievement.
Sir, we never purchased anything. We never got any RSP sanction. We picked up all the brake valves from accidented wagons which were lying all over the place in Southeastern Railway. Other than pipes, I don't think we bought anything. But it was great fun. 3 rakes, I remember still.
Atal sir, आपने कौन सा? What was the wagon you said? Bobbin, is it?
Yeah.
BOBY. Okay. Okay, right, sir. उसको from vacuum you just converted to air brake, just on your own decision कि कर रहा है.
Yeah. करना.
Yemi साहब भी थे ना साथ में. And the whole Southeastern Railway was behind me.
Right,
so
sir.
there was no issue. Mr. CUM was just after me कि करो जल्दी करो. I want it yesterday type of thing. So,
And it helped the operations for the railways
we replaced 12 vacuum rakes with 3 rakes total.
Okay.
That is all that we made, and there was not fourth one was not required. It was that good, and the drivers became very confident because their braking power was very good. Just बताया इस Anand साहब ने, the section was treacherous.
Yeah, and those locos had air brakes. All the locos.
They were electric locos. They were regular locos. They had
okay. Right, sir. Thank you, sir.
Right then. On behalf of the Rail Enthusiast Society, we would like to thank Mr. Anand for a wonderful lecture, an interesting lecture. Although many of our audience were expecting a lot of jokes, but I think the subject is serious. RDSO is a place where research goes on, and Mr. Anand did put it in a lighter vein. So thank you very much. We have had a very record audience today where we had 61 or 62 people.
So the highest was 69. At one stage we had 69.
Okay, but still today was fantastic. But thank you once again, and thank you audience for participating and staying throughout this session. We look forward to our next talk, which will be exactly 1 month from now on the 3rd Sunday of
It's the 20th of next month, 20th of June.
20th of June. So, JL, would you like to say something?
And the talker and the speaker is going to be Mr. Atulya Sinha.
Oh, great.
Wow. Okay.
Sir, one question. I think we must have exclusive session from Mr. Anand, only jokes.
Okay. I hope you are hearing Mr. Anand.
Yes, I can hear that.
Probably it could be non-vegetarian also.
No, about jokes, I may be permitted to say, we had an inauguration ceremony in Bhavnagar. I mean, it was at Porbandar, and Mr. Rambilas Paswan had come to inaugurate something, I forget which, and the other side was Shankar Singh Waghela. Mics failed. For a few seconds, the mics failed, mainly because we had made some new attachments and the Dalit Sena had overrun that. Anyway, so after when the meeting was over and I was dropping off the then Mr. L.K. Sinha. He turned around and there was Sunil Sengupta who had come from headquarters. So he turned to me and he said, Anand, mics should not fail. So I said, sir, kya kiya jaye? They failed. They didn't fail. There was a few moments when the mic was dead. And Minister announced an award of 1 lakh rupees for the excellent work done by Bhavnagar Division. So in my opinion, it was all, you know, such important functions, you should have had rehearsals. Why didn't you have a full dress rehearsal? Sir, I'm going to tell you, we did have a sort of rehearsal. But then, you know, sir, I told him the joke about the Arab Sheikh and rehearsals. And he was very upset. When he returned to Railway Board, people asked him, how was your visit to Bhavnagar Division? He said, everything went off all right. It is Sala Anand jo hai. When I asked him why the mics failed, he comes out with a dirty joke. Look at him, how irresponsible. Can a DRM be so irresponsible, tracking dirty jokes? So the visitors would say, sir, what was the joke? He said, I'm not going to tell you. You people seem to be more interested in Anand's jokes than any serious matter. But I hope all of you will remember the Playboy joke about rehearsals.
Thank you, Mr. Anand.
So recording will be available after a few days.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody. We have sat through a captive audience.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sushil. Thank you. Thank you, Anand. Rakesh Prakash.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Mathur would like to give closing remarks.
No, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining in the meeting, and we look forward to seeing all of you again next month.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
So I'm closing the meeting.
Right, sir. All the best.
Thank you, Mr. Anand, once again.